Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something interesting, the crossroads of crypto and politics.
Yeah, it's a fascinating space, always evolving.
Definitely. So to set the scene, we're using a market snapshot from exactly a year ago, Monday, May 12th, 2024. Today being May 12th, 2025.
Right, good baseline. So what did it look like back then?
Well, the global crypto market cap was sitting at about $3.45 trillion. That was up around 2.5% in 24 hours.
Pretty hefty number. And volume?
Daily volume was $118 billion. Well, that was actually down slightly, maybe 1.9%.
Okay. And DeFi? Always interesting to see what's happening.
Yeah, DeFi volume was, let's see, $12.89 billion, so about 11% of the total crypto volume. And the total value locked, the TVL, in real-world assets was $12.19 billion, according to Defalama.
So significant activity. People were definitely using DeFi, not just speculating.
Yeah.
Lending, borrowing.
Exactly. And the DEXs, the decentralized exchanges, were pretty active too. Uniswap saw nearly $3 billion in volume. PancakeSwap around $2.35 billion.
Wow, yeah, those are big numbers for DXs. Shows real usage.
Totally. Now, stablecoins were also a huge part of the picture. Market cap around $243 billion.
And Tether, USDT, still dominating.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Almost 62% market share. And the 24-hour volume was, get this, $85.5 billion.
That's massive volume for USDT. Shows its importance in trading.
For sure. Circle's USDC had about $9 billion in volume, and FDUSD was around $2.26 billion.
Okay.
Now let's zoom in on the big two, Bitcoin and Ethereum. Bitcoin's market cap was just over $2 trillion.
It's still king.
Right. Ethereum was much smaller then, around $34 billion market cap. But here's something interesting that reported trading volume.
This is a discrepancy.
Yeah. CoinMarketCap had Bitcoin volume way up at $47 billion and Ethereum at $25 billion.
Okay.
But CoinGecko's numbers were quite a bit lower, like $30 billion for Bitcoin and $18 million for Ethereum.
Ah, right. That comes down to methodology, doesn't it?
Oh, so.
Well, CoinGecko is generally seen as, let's say, more selective. They tend to focus on exchanges with, better oversight, more reliable data. CoinMarketCap often casts a wider net, includes more exchanges, maybe some with less transparency or wash trading issues.
So the numbers can look pretty different depending on the source.
Exactly. It's a good reminder for you, the listener, to always kind of consider where your data is coming from. Don't just take one number as gospel.
Makes perfect sense. Okay, shifting gears a bit. Meme tokens.
Ah, always a colorful corner of the market.
Right. Dogecoin was leading the pack, market cap $35 billion.
Still significant.
Followed by Shiba Inu at $9.5 billion. Pepe Coin, $6 billion, the official Trump token at $2.7 billion, and Bonk at $1.7 billion.
Quite the range. Shows the speculative interest was definitely there.
No kidding. And price-wise for the majors, Bitcoin was around $103,962, down just a tiny bit, 0.07% in 24 hours, but up over 10% for the week.
Okay, so some weekly gains.
Yeah, and Ethereum was similar. Price around 2,426 cents. Down slightly on the day, but up a whopping 40% over the week.
Wow, 40%. That's a big move.
Huge. Ripple's XRP2 trading at $2.39. Small daily dip, but up almost 11% weekly.
So a general upward trend over that week, despite some daily fluctuations.
Exactly. And interestingly, these pumps seem to line up with the FOMC meeting where they decided to keep interest rates the same.
Ah, right. That makes sense. The market often reacts positively to stability or perceived stability from central banks.
Yeah.
Holding rates might have calmed nerves.
Yeah, less uncertainty, maybe more appetite for risk on assets like crypto.
Could be. It just highlights how, even though crypto aims to be separate, it's still, plugged into these larger macro financial events. It doesn't exist in a total vacuum.
Fair point. So, okay, let's unpack the main theme for today. It's this growing link, maybe even a collision, between Bitcoin and politics.
Which is pretty ironic given Bitcoin's origin story, right? Separating money and state.
Exactly. Total irony. Like, take Conor McGregor, famous UFC guy. Apparently he was thinking about a presidential run in Ireland.
Really? I remember hearing something about that.
Yeah, and he actually tweeted support for Ireland creating a Bitcoin reserve, said it would strengthen public control over money.
Interesting. Using Bitcoin as a tool for national sovereignty, essentially.
Kind of. Of course, he was also getting flack politically for other things, like his stance on immigration.
Right. So a complex figure, but putting Bitcoin into the national political conversation over there.
Yeah. And then you had talk around Donald Trump and a possible Bitcoin strategic reserve in the U.S.
Okay, but wasn't that clarified?
It was, yeah. It's important for you listening to know he mostly talked about not selling any Bitcoin the U.S. might already hold, not necessarily about the government actively buying it for a reserve.
Right. Big difference. Buying would likely need, actual legislation.
Definitely. But the idea of states doing it, like maybe New Hampshire was mentioned, wasn't totally dismissed.
So the conversation was happening at different levels.
Precisely. Which brings us to our core question today. What are the pros and cons if a government did decide to hold Bitcoin in its reserves? And how would they even manage that?
It's a fundamental question, really. Can this decentralized asset fit into a centralized national strategy? Let's start with the potential upsides, the pros.
Okay, first argument you often hear, it's a hedge against inflation.
Right. The fixed supply argument. Bitcoin's supply is capped at 21 million coins, period.
Unlike fiat currency, where central banks can just print more.
Exactly. So proponents argue that this inherent scarcity makes it a potential store of value, protecting against the devaluation of traditional currencies, especially if inflation is a worry.
Makes sense. What's next?
Reserve diversification. Standard portfolio management thinking.
So adding Bitcoin alongside the usual stuff like gold, foreign currency, bonds.
Yeah. The idea is that Bitcoin might behave differently. It's not perfectly correlated with those traditional assets. Our source even noted gold prices dipped around that time. So adding Bitcoin could potentially lower the overall risk of the reserve portfolio.
Okay, diversification. Point 3.
Monetary sovereignty. This is a big one, especially for smaller nations or nations maybe wanting less reliance on, say, the U.S. dollar.
Right. Reduce dependence on a single reserve currency or major central banks. Especially with geopolitical uncertainty, like under the Biden administration then, or potential future issues.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Holding Bitcoin could be seen as a way to gain a bit more financial autonomy, operate outside the direct influence of another nation's monetary policy.
Interesting. Fourth pro.
Geopolitical leverage, maybe? Positioning the country as forward-thinking?
Like being an early adopter gives you a seat at the table in the digital economy?
Sort of. It signals you're embracing innovation, potentially attracting tech investment and talent, putting you at the forefront of decentralized finance.
Okay, related to that, the fifth point, boosting innovation and reputation.
Yeah, it's a signaling mechanism. If a government holds Bitcoin, it might attract crypto startups, VCs, developers. It brands the country as tech-friendly.
We saw Pakistan exploring crypto then, maybe trying to capture some of that.
Potentially, yeah. It's about creating that ecosystem.
And finally, transparency.
This is a unique one for Bitcoin. Because it's on a public blockchain, government holdings could, in theory, be publicly audited.
Anyone could verify the address and the amount held.
Pretty much. That's a stark contrast to, say, gold reserves. Think Fort Knox, very opaque, right?
Yeah.
You kind of have to trust they have what they say they have.
Right. Okay, so those are some compelling arguments for holding Bitcoin, but there have to be downsides. What are the big risks?
Oh, absolutely. And the biggest, most obvious one is volatility.
The price swings are just wild sometimes.
Exactly. Bitcoin's price can move dramatically very quickly. For a national treasury, that kind of volatility is a major risk. It could seriously impact financial stability, especially for smaller countries.
Like El Salvador, which adopted it, or, as the source mentioned, maybe Pakistan, Bangladesh.
Yeah.
Smaller economies might be more vulnerable.
Definitely. A big crash could wipe out a significant chunk of reserves.
Okay, volatility is huge. What else?
Regulatory and political uncertainty. Bitcoin's legal status is still kind of a patchwork globally.
Yeah, it's not universally accepted or regulated the same way everywhere.
Right. And future regulations, maybe restrictions from certain political groups, the source mentioned, potential concerns from left-leaning politicians could really impact Bitcoin's liquidity or how it can be used as a reserve.
So a government adopts it, then the rules change, and suddenly it's harder to sell or use.
Precisely. That's a real political risk. Third, cybersecurity. This is massive.
Losing the private keys.
Losing the keys, getting hacked. Bitcoin transactions are irreversible. If a government messes up key management or gets targeted by sophisticated hackers, maybe state-sponsored ones like North Korea.
The funds are just gone. Poof. Forever.
Exactly. The security challenge is immense.
Okay, that's scary. Fourth risk.
Environmental criticism.
Yeah.
The whole proof-of-work energy consumption debate.
Right. ESG concerns. Even if miners use renewables, the narrative is often negative.
And governments, especially maybe more left-leaning ones focused on climate change, could face huge political backlash for holding an asset seen as environmentally costly.
Yeah, the optics could be really bad, regardless of the technical arguments.
Fifth risk, liquidity constraints. What happens if a government needs to sell a lot of Bitcoin quickly?
Could it crash the market?
It could certainly disrupt it. Large government sales could push the price down significantly, making it harder to liquidate the rest. We saw the German government selling some Bitcoin in 2024, and that caused ripples.
Right.
Imagine a much larger sale.
Right, so selling might not be easy or clean. And the last con.
Governance and trust risk. Simple mismanagement, incompetence, maybe even outright theft or corruption by officials handling the Bitcoin.
That would destroy public trust, wouldn't it?
Completely. Trust in the government's handling of funds, and maybe even trust in Bitcoin itself.
Okay, so lots of potential pitfalls.
Yeah.
If a government still decides to go for it, what are the absolute key things they need to get right in managing it?
Number one, without a doubt, is private key management. Security has to be bulletproof.
So not just keeping keys on a sticky note.
Definitely not. We're talking multi-signature wallets, where multiple people have to approve a transaction, hardware wallets, offline cold storage, top-tier security protocols. The source mentioned your Bitcoin DXB project, actually, as a place for expert advice on this.
Right, specialized expertise is non-negotiable. What about custody? Who actually holds it?
Good question. That's the second key point. Robust custody solutions. Probably using institutional-grade custodians, companies that specialize in safeguarding digital assets for big players.
Or maybe distributing control.
Yeah, maybe distributed or decentralized custody models, again requiring multi-party sign-offs. The source mentioned the U.S. Treasury Secretary potentially being involved, which shows it needs high-level, accountable oversight.
Okay, security and custody. What about the legal side?
Third point, a clear legal and regulatory framework. You need laws defining Bitcoin. Is it property, currency, a commodity? How is it taxed? What are the rules for holding it as a reserve?
Clarity is essential. The source recommended checking official sites, like the White House website in the U.S. context, for accurate info.
Absolutely. Rely on official sources for that. Fourth consideration, auditing and transparency.
Tying back to the pro we discussed earlier.
Exactly. If transparency is a benefit, you need to deliver on it. Make the holdings verifiable on the blockchain via public addresses. Implement regular, clear reporting. Build that trust.
Makes sense. And risk management, given the volatility.
Fifth point, a solid risk management strategy. Don't go all in on Bitcoin. Maybe a small percentage of reserves initially.
Diversify within crypto, too.
Potentially, yeah. A basket of crypto assets might make sense for some. And use strategies like dollar cost averaging, buying gradually over time, which El Salvador reportedly did to smooth out entry points.
Okay. And finally, what about actually using the Bitcoin or selling it?
That's the sixth point. Having an exit strategy and liquidity plan. Clear policies decided in advance.
Like, under what circumstances would we sell? How much? How do we manage the market impact?
Exactly. And planning for emergencies. Also, crucially, education. Building internal expertise, training staff to manage these assets properly.
The source mentions some U.S. states already have policies for converting crypto donations to Bitcoin, right? So some are thinking about practical integration.
Yeah. Suggests some level of planning and acceptance is already happening at subnational levels in some places.
Okay, let's shift back to the direct politics for a moment. Our source mentioned Vice President JD Vance speaking at Bitcoin 2025.
Right, happening around June, July. And he's been a vocal Bitcoin supporter for a while, hasn't he?
Yeah, disclosed owning a decent chunk back in 2021, between $100 and $250K, plus his connections to Peter Thiel, big tech, and crypto figure.
So having a VP actively engaging with the Bitcoin community, that's pretty significant. It really shows Bitcoin entering the mainstream political discourse in the U.S.
Definitely. And his presence impacts how people, maybe even globally, view the U.S. stance on crypto.
For sure. U.S. political moves have huge ripple effects.
The source also highlighted this kind of split. Generally, right-wing or Republican politicians and maybe UK conservatives seem more open to Bitcoin.
Yeah, often framing it around innovation, freedom, less government control.
Whereas left-wing or Democrat politicians and maybe UK Labour tend to be more cautious, sometimes critical.
Right, raising concerns about consumer protection, financial stability, illicit finance, environmental impact.
Elizabeth Warren was mentioned specifically, calling for bans on big tech like Meta, issuing stablecoins, and scrutinizing the Biden administration's dealings with Binance.
Exactly. It reflects different core priorities and views on the role of regulation. That ideological split is really shaping the crypto policy landscape.
I remember the Genius Act. The source said it stalled partly because of left-leaning opposition.
Yeah, linked to broader debates about, control versus freedom online, censorship, these bigger ideological battles play out in specific legislation like that?
Interesting stuff. Even the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, usually pretty traditional, right?
Very traditional. Central bank for central banks.
They put out a report highlighting a surge in cross-border crypto payments, Bitcoin, stablecoins like USDT, USDC, especially during economic stress.
That is interesting coming from the BIS. What was driving it?
Speculation, sure, but also remittances, especially in places with high inflation or where sending money home is expensive.
Makes sense. A real-world use case, particularly in developing countries.
Yeah, Turkey, India, Russia were mentioned as becoming hubs, especially after China cracked down. The source even suggested checking out a separate AI-generated deep dive just on that BIS report.
Wow, okay. So even the BIS acknowledges crypto's role, particularly in these specific situations. That's a notable shift.
Definitely. Okay, let's jump over to the UAE and the Middle East quickly. Some really interesting things happening there, too. First, AI education.
Oh, yeah. What's news?
The UAE announced mandatory AI classes, starting from age 4.
Age 4. Seriously.
Seriously, starting next academic year, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid announced it. The curriculum covers tech, ethics, real-world use, tailored for different age groups.
That is incredibly forward-thinking, building AI literacy from the ground up. Part of their national strategy, I assume?
Exactly. Integrating it into computing, design, innovation subjects, really embedding it early.
Wow. Okay, what about crypto in the UAE?
Emirate, the national fuel provider, is partnering with Crypto.com.
To do what?
Accept crypto payments at gas stations. Bitcoin, stablecoins.
Paying for fuel with Bitcoin? That's pretty mainstream.
Yeah. Starting with 10 stations, expanding to 155, mostly Dubai and the Northern Emirates. They even have a flagship emotaxcrypto.com station.
That really cements the UAE's reputation as a crypto and fintech hub, doesn't it? Fits right in with Dubai's smart city goals.
Totally. Shows real-world adoption growing there.
So wrapping this all up, it's clear this intersection of Bitcoin, government, global events, it's incredibly complex, constantly shifting.
Yeah, we've seen the potential benefits, the inflation hedge, the innovation boost, but also the serious risks, volatility, security, regulation.
And for any government thinking about this, the management considerations are huge. Key security, custody, legal frameworks, transparency. It's not simple.
Plus the whole political dimension, the different viewpoints shaping policy.
What really stands out is that core tension, isn't it? An asset born out of a desire to bypass centralized systems is now being seriously considered by those systems.
Can that work? Can you integrate this decentralized thing into a national strategy effectively?
That's the multi-trillion-dollar question, maybe literally.
So here's something for you to think about until our next deep dive. Considering everything we've touched on, potential national Bitcoin reserves, AI classes for 4-year-olds, paying for gas with crypto, what are the really significant, maybe unforeseen ways these technologies might reshape things in the next few years?
And critically, how do we find that balance between decentralization's promise and the necessary role, or maybe interference, of government?
Lots to chew on there. We'll leave you with that thought.